Bright lights. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 16th Annual Eugene McCarthy Lecture. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Matt Lindstrom, and I have the great privilege of serving as the Ed Henry Professor of Political Science and Director of the Eugene J. McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. Now, back in 2006, Catherine and Dan Whalen generously donated a gift to St. John's to start the McCarthy Center, and since then, we've been forever grateful for their support. And as director of the McCarthy Center, I see this impact every single day. Since the center was launched in 2006, we set out to increase and empower undergraduate civic involvement through diverse partnerships and programs on and off campus, especially building upon the rich legacy of CSB SJU graduates who work, serve, volunteer, and lead in a wide variety of civic capacities. For the past 16 years, the McCarthy Lecture and the McCarthy Center has featured distinguished speakers from across all professional and ideological backgrounds. And tonight, we're deeply honored to welcome General Paul Nakasone back to his home state of Minnesota and back to his home campus. You know, about 6 months ago, I met up with General Nakasone in St. Paul and had a very important conversation with him. I said, "Paul, do you believe in free speech?" He said, "Yes." I said, "So, how about coming to St. John's next October? Give a free speech." He said, "Sure." So here we are. Just like that. But in all seriousness, the General's a longtime friend of the McCarthy Center, St. Ben, St. John's. He's consistently supported our students, our graduates, even prospective students. He regularly meets with the DC students or the students in the Washington, D.C. internship program and thoroughly supports the energetic St. Ben, St. John's graduates in the D.C. area. His kindness, humility, intellect, and dedication inspire all of us to think beyond ourselves, to consider all perspectives within a morality of decency and justice. Nakasone's commitment to public service was solidified when he was a student ROTC cadet here. We know that campus involvement leads to a lifetime of civic engagement. Inspiring younger people couldn't be more important than it is today. In fact, a recent New York Times poll found that, quote, 71% of all voters said that democracy was at risk, but just 7% identified that as the most important problem facing the country. A majority of voters in both parties identified the opposing party as a major threat to democracy. So it's in this context that it's imperative that we draw upon the conscience and courage of the late Senator Eugene McCarthy, graduate of St. John's, who famously stood up to his own party in 1968 and ran for president, largely to protest President Johnson's support of the Vietnam War. As I mentioned, he was a St. John's graduate. Eugene McCarthy was a poet, professor, and a politician. He stood up to the status quo and inspired millions of people, especially young people, to get involved and to lead with the courage of their convictions. Since the center was founded, it's been a great joy getting to know the McCarthy family. And they're unable to be here tonight, but they send their greetings, appreciation, and encouragement. So in these times of uncertainty and waning trust in democratic institutions, the work of the center couldn't be more important. We'll continue to educate and support students to pursue a larger common good on and off campus. One way we do this is through voter literacy and involvement with elections, something we're going to hear more about tonight. Along with this effort to enhance and encourage civic involvement, the McCarthy Center also recently launched an initiative for Native Nation relations. This project is led by sociology professor Ted Gordon, who now holds the Joe Ferry Professorship in the McCarthy Center. Together with the CSB SJU Indigenous Student Association and a growing group of donors and supporters, we're collaborating with a variety of Native tribes to examine the past and present relationships between CSB, SJU, and our Native neighbors, especially concerning the Native boarding schools here on both campuses, and the larger efforts, the historical efforts from the federal government and various religious organizations involved with forced assimilation and cultural genocide. This work is difficult, but it's also quite inspiring. You're going to hear a lot more about this throughout the next couple of years. You know, we know that campus involvement leads to a lifetime of civic engagement. We thank you all for being here. We're especially enthused to welcome the General out here in a few minutes. Before we do that, I want to give a special thanks to the student assistants tonight, also the fine staff of, the excellent staff of Fine Arts Programming, Victoria Evans, the Assistant Director of the McCarthy Center, and our awesome new president of both St. Ben's and St. John's, Dr. Brian Brees. And with that, I'd like to call up and welcome Kate Fensky, a McCarthy Center student employee who will introduce President Brees as well as General Nakasone. Kate is a senior integrative science major with a focus on public health and a minor in political science. It's her second year working for the McCarthy Center. She's currently leading our mentor program. She's involved in a wide variety of things actually with the center. And she also, I'm not sure how she has the time, is one of the leading editors of The Record, the student paper. So with that, thank you, Kate, for your involvement today, and please help me welcome Kate Fensky.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening, everyone. Welcome all to the 16th Annual Eugene J. McCarthy Lecture for Conscience and Courage in Public Life. This lecture was created to inspire a new generation of young people, as well as inform and connect them with alumni and friends of the center and of the colleges. As I look around the room, I see that mission living out in all of you. I see friends, parents, alumni, faculty, and staff. This evening, the question and answer portion of this lecture will be moderated by CSB and SJU Joint President Brian Brees. President Brees joined our campuses in July after serving as president of St. Norbert College, and during his tenure, he guided St. Norbert to record enrollment, implemented new academic offerings, and inspired new equity and diversity changes. He, his wife Carol, professor emerita at the University of St. Thomas, and their energetic Bernedoodle puppy, George, has been welcomed with open arms to all aspects of campus life for the past few months. I'm also thrilled to welcome our lecturer tonight, General Paul Nakasone. A native of White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and a graduate of St. John's University, where he earned his commission through the Reserve Officers Training Corps, General Nakasone now serves as the commander of the U.S. Cybersecurity Command, Director of the National Security Agency, and the Chief of the Central Security Service. Throughout his career, General Nakasone has served in joint and Army assignments in the United States, the Republic of Korea, Iraq, and Afghanistan. His most recent overseas posting was as the Director of Intelligence for International Security Assistance Force Joint Command in Kabul, Afghanistan. Today, General Nakasone will address the approach the National Security Agency and the U.S. Cyber Command are taking to overcome evolving cyber challenges posed by recent and upcoming elections. Although there weren't necessarily any major cyber challenges when Eugene McCarthy was running for Democratic presidential nomination in the 60s, General Nakasone will address fundamental American values that McCarthy also held close: the promise of a safe and secure democracy, and the commitment to the principles of a democratic self-government. General Nakasone and Senator McCarthy represent the best of us, taking the values that they learned from their time at CSB and SJU into lives of dedicated service to the American people. As young people preparing for our own careers, General Nakasone's conscience and courage in public life is an important lesson for all of us. Please join me in welcoming General Nakasone back to CSB SJU.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Kate. So kind of you to do the introduction tonight. President Brees, thank you again for the warm welcome back to my alma mater. I congratulate you on leading two great institutions, St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict. I'd also like to thank the Board of Trustees, distinguished university leaders, and Professor Matt Lindstrom for organizing this year's lecture. Good evening, fellow Johnnies and Bennies. It's very good to be back. We saw each other last year, of course, but I'm excited to have been asked to return so soon. I always look forward to a visit here. These halls and these grounds are indeed special to me. My years here were a time of tremendous growth for me and my classmates and friends. They left a lasting and happy impact on us. Since graduation, I have used lessons from here in every aspect of my career. I learned about dedication, critical thinking, hard work, and devotion to duty. I'm indebted to St. John's, to the Benedictine community, and to my professors. And I can finally say with confidence that I have returned all my overdue library books, as well as the borrowed trays, utensils, and cups from the reef. My Army career, in fact, began here as well, for I received my commission through St. John's ROTC program. St. John's prepared me well for military life and leadership, most notably by instilling in me and my classmates the virtues and values of service. On that note, I'm honored to be here with you tonight to present this year's Eugene McCarthy Lecture. Its goal, to promote conscience and courage in public life, resonates with me. Since graduating from St. John's and receiving my commission in 1986, I've had the honor of serving our great country, working for and with thousands of military and civilian personnel, not just Americans, but allies as well, who also dedicated their lives and their careers to a greater good. That experience taught me that the sacrifices entailed in public service are typically surpassed by the growth and the opportunity that accompany it. With sacrifice also comes a satisfaction and a humble pride. To know that your effort went toward a purpose higher than self is especially rewarding. The late Senator Eugene McCarthy knew that feeling, having spent most of his professional life in public service. Some of you probably know his story, but it bears repeating, as it speaks to his service and the courage he demonstrated. He was born into a devout Catholic family here in Minnesota. His father was a postmaster, and he attended both St. John's Prep and St. John's University before earning his master's at the University of Minnesota. He taught school children in Minnesota and North Dakota, then came back to teach economics and education here at St. John's. He also explored religious life, contemplating his vocation at St. John's Abbey. But our country was at war, and he decided he had other work to do. He joined the Army in 1943, and ironically, served as a code breaker in the Military Intelligence Division, which oversaw critical intelligence breakthroughs that hastened victory over the Axis. Like so many members of the greatest generation, he came home from World War II, married, started a family, and resumed the teaching career he had set aside when he donned a uniform. Drawn to politics, Eugene McCarthy would serve in the House of Representatives for a decade, and then as a senator from Minnesota for 2 terms. Most people naturally remember him as Senator McCarthy. That was his title when he was almost selected as President Lyndon Johnson's running mate in 1964. An interesting twist, given his opposition to Johnson's re-election campaign 4 years later. That opposition made him famous. 1968 was a tough year for our country. With civil disturbances, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the setback to the campaign for civil rights, and growing protests against the war in Vietnam. It might seem ironic this evening to hear a general recounting that latter point, but Senator McCarthy raised important questions about the conduct of the war in Vietnam that urgently needed wider debate. Senator McCarthy showed not only conviction but courage in putting himself forward against the sitting president of his own party in order to give the voters a choice. He said he could not, in good conscience, support policies that he believed would harm the nation in the long run. His stand prompted the Democratic Party to discuss and decide what it thought about a key national security issue. Senator McCarthy's surprising showing in the New Hampshire primary in March 1968 then galvanized opposition to President Johnson's re-election and prompted him to withdraw from the race. This was not the end of the war, but it marked a turn in the conflict and ended the escalation of the American war effort. Ultimately, Eugene McCarthy was not nominated by his party to run against Richard Nixon in the 1968 election. He never became President McCarthy. Yet his primary challenge was not in vain. He had taken a principled stand against opposition from his party's leadership and indeed many of his friends, not to mention rivals for the Democratic nomination after President Johnson's withdrawal. He did not go along to get along, and he helped change history as a result. I see the task of our nation's military as one of preserving the freedom and the space, as it were, for people like Senator McCarthy and each of you to stand on principle when conscience dictates. Regardless of party or creed, that freedom and that space are worth defending. That is one of our critical roles in the Department of Defense. At St. John's and St. Ben's, we speak of building values and character, but character building continues long after you graduate, as Senator McCarthy showed. As you set out in your lives and careers, I encourage you to emulate the courage and patriotism that Senator McCarthy demonstrated, and consider following his own footsteps of public service to our nation. As Commander of U.S. Cyber Command and the Director of the National Security Agency, I also want to offer my perspective on meeting the challenges that our country faces from disruptive and destructive technologies wielded by motivated and capable adversaries. When I graduated from college and became an officer, our national security focus was on the Soviet Union. The communist leadership in Moscow controlled a massive nuclear arsenal, but ran a second-rate economy and peddled a moribund ideology. The Cold War ended 3 decades ago, of course, and the brief unipolar moment it left us when America enjoyed unmatched technological, economic, and military strength has ended. Our time is defined by strategic competition, as the President's new national security strategy explains. Russia is still an acute threat, as that strategy notes. Cyber Command and NSA have watched events in Ukraine for a year now, since President Putin began deploying forces on the Ukrainian border to reinforce his threats. The ensuing conflict has not only been the deadliest in Europe since World War II, it threatens to escalate if the Russians employ additional weaponry. At the same time, challenges to peace and security from states like Iran and North Korea, as well as from various violent extremist groups, continue to threaten the lives and liberties in many regions. The complications that these actors introduce in the international system make even transnational problems tougher to mitigate and to solve, from corruption to the drug trade to human trafficking, cybercrime, disease, and climate change. The new national security strategy, however, rightly deems the People's Republic of China the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to advance that objective. China thus represents our pacing challenge in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, one that will shape the careers you experience and the world you will help build for the next generation. This is a challenge that plays out in cyberspace as well. When I attended St. John's, the internet was a collection of computers at U.S. government agencies, universities, and federally sponsored research centers, plus a few thousand computer zealots with terminals linked by dial-up modems. In a few years, the internet became a vital component of our national infrastructure, virtually as important as our power lines and water supply. Our society now relies on online access and network data for economic growth, for communication, for national security, and even for education. Indeed, an American of college age in 2022 cannot remember a world without laptops, cell phones, social media, and global connectivity. Most of you grew up with home computers, email, cell phones, and social media, all connected globally and usually wirelessly as well. You rely on technology and opportunities that were literally the stuff of science fiction when I was here at St. John's. In fact, to put this in context for you, during my time, arguably the most appreciated technology we had at St. John's was the double ring. That was the alert in your dorm room. There was an inbound call from St. Ben's. That sound got more attention than a fire alarm. But as we built that connectivity and the opportunities that formed from it, we were not always aware of the risks of doing so. This is why cybersecurity is so important. Adversaries have shown they possess the capability to reach our critical infrastructure through cyberspace. Cyber attacks have the potential to cause catastrophic damage, both in physical terms, as we saw last year in the Colonial Pipeline disruption, and in less tangible ways as well. The foreign meddling in our elections, for example, runs the risk of dividing Americans against one another and causing lingering distrust in our democracy. Let me reiterate this point. Without focused effort on our part across the public and private sectors, adversaries can reach over our military forces and allies to impact our society, holding critical infrastructure at risk, stealing intellectual capital, threatening the privacy and security of our families, and impairing both the functioning and the legitimacy of our democratic processes. In short, they threaten to shrink that freedom of conscience that Senator McCarthy defended. As the head of both U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency, I have some insights into these challenges. I serve as one of 11 combatant commanders and also as the director of the largest component of the nation's intelligence community. This is a broad range of duties that affords a nearly unique perspective on events and trends. What we see every day is that our adversaries continue to seize on new technology and turn its marvels against their perceived domestic and foreign opponents, including us. As we now witness in Ukraine, this connectivity is changing the course and character of war. We have also seen subtler ways in which cyberspace operations affect our nation, our institutions, and even our personal lives. This is where the missions of U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency take on such importance for our nation's security, prosperity, and future. Each organization has a different mission, roles, and objectives, but in concert, they enhance the unique advantages of each other to operate effectively in the cyber domain. NSA is the largest component of the intelligence community with a workforce of 40,000 civilians and military personnel. The agency has two defining capabilities. It makes code and it breaks code. NSA collects, analyzes, and disseminates foreign intelligence. Its capabilities are unparalleled. We at NSA, working with our allies, produce critical intelligence that informs national leaders, commanders, and planners. The agency is also responsible for preventing cyber threats to national security systems and critical infrastructure, primarily our military weapons systems and America's defense industrial base. Here, NSA's traditional code-making mission to protect military and leadership communications has evolved into a cybersecurity mission to help defend the nation. We also work with federal, law enforcement, intelligence, and industry partners and allies as well to ensure that the insights stemming from our foreign intelligence efforts can quickly feed back into the cybersecurity ecosystem. U.S. Cyber Command is the Pentagon's warfighting arm in cyberspace. With 20,000 uniformed members and civilians, it's responsible for directing and coordinating U.S. cyberspace operations around the world. Cyber Command performs 3 missions as one of 11 unified commands under the Secretary of Defense and the President. The command secures, operates, and defends the Department of Defense information networks, reaching from the Pentagon all the way to the tactical edge on nearly every continent. This surface area is comprised of over 15,000 classified, unclassified, and special purpose networks, over 4 million DoD computers, plus 145,000 mobility devices. Cyber Command also supports other military commands in charge of U.S. forces in Europe and the Pacific, so that they can execute presidentially directed operations. The command also defends the nation in cyberspace against attacks of significant consequence. We enable and act, helping our domestic partners defend critical infrastructure and democratic processes, as well as to bring to justice criminal actors who employ cyber means against Americans. These two organizations that I head are separate and distinct, and yet the synergy between their capabilities is truly powerful. I see it every day in the spirit of innovation pervading both NSA and Cyber Command, in the can-do attitude of their workforce, in the long hours they work, and the readiness of allies and other agencies to partner with us. The complexity of the cyber environment indeed means that even with both U.S. Cyber Command and NSA's combined resources, we cannot do it alone. That is why one of our key goals is to enhance the skills and expertise of partners, both home and abroad. We need such partners to stay ahead of emerging technologies and to improve our own technical capabilities. The future of cybersecurity lies in encouraging the development of America's scientific and technical talent, the people who will make it work. I say this often. For U.S. Cyber Command and NSA, their greatest strategic advantage is their people, the experts who develop the tools and process critical knowledge. That is why we are focused on expanding cybersecurity education and the nation's talent pool of cybersecurity experts. Intelligence work carries a reputation of working in the shadows, but with cybersecurity, we've had to shift how we think about sharing intelligence. Rather than waiting until an attack happens, we now work with foreign partners to mitigate the potentially catastrophic damage from these attacks. This is why we stay constantly engaged with our partners to stop attacks before they occur. I would be remiss if I neglected to mention election security in this context. We at NSA and Cyber Command are counting the hours until the upcoming midterm elections. Indeed, I see a parallel here between Senator McCarthy's career and the work that we are doing at the two organizations that I head. We know, of course, that our democratic polity depends on the free and informed choices cast by millions of voters in regularly scheduled and fairly run elections. This insight drove Senator McCarthy's stand in 1968, as I suggested earlier, when he put just a choice to the voters in his party. We would not be here this evening to commemorate his memory and his service if the 1968 primaries had been rigged to favor one candidate or shaped by foreign influence or interference. We have seen in recent elections that foreign actors have indeed sought to exert covert influence and convince Americans to distrust election returns. Indeed, election security is an enduring, no-fail mission. Although we have not yet seen foreign manipulation of ballots and vote counting, we will remain vigilant for such possibilities. This effort remains our top priority through the elections until the votes are certified. This mission is not something that I or virtually anyone else foresaw when I attended St. John's. Although in my defense, I was mainly focused on surviving calculus at the time. A military and intelligence role in election defense is still novel in this country, but it is warranted when adversary states direct their military and intelligence services and their proxies to flood social media platforms with fake commentary on our politics, and especially if their powerful cyberspace capabilities disrupt American election systems. We have unique tools and capabilities to counter such plans. 2 years ago, I established a permanent election security group co-led by senior leaders, one from the agency and one from the command. They and their staffs and colleagues have been part of a federal election and the federal election effort to defend the upcoming midterm elections, which is only 19 days away from today. Our election security group produces and acts on insights that frustrate foreign adversaries while enabling the work of our partners. It focuses in 3 areas: generate insights into adversaries outside the United States with actionable foreign intelligence to find, expose, and mitigate foreign threats; sharing information across the government and with allies to harden defenses and to mitigate malicious cyber activity; and acting against foreign efforts to influence or interfere in our elections. All of this is done in close coordination with our partners, especially in the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They have the insights and authorities and connections to assist state and local authorities in ensuring our elections run smoothly and without tampering. That is why they lead federal election defense, while our efforts complement theirs. As a result of this collaboration, our 2018 and 2020 elections ran without foreign interference in the balloting and without decisive foreign influence in shaping voters' choices. This was not for want of trying on the part of adversary actors, particularly in Russia and Iran. We see evidence that malicious actors are seeking again to do what they have done previously. However, we have the confidence in our defenses and our collaboration, and we will ensure that the upcoming elections will not be disrupted by foreign influence. Before I finish tonight, I want to address all the students in attendance. You will soon embark on your own careers in a world seemingly beset with complicated and daunting issues. But I have hope when I look out at you from this podium. Indeed, you manifest that hope that we can tackle the challenges facing us. Remember the example of Senator McCarthy, who listened to his own conscience when he told him that his country ranked ahead of partisanship, and drew upon lessons he learned here to act on that conviction. The lessons you are learning at St. John's and St. Ben's will give you the skills to face those challenges. The time you spend here will make that possible, so be sure to use the skills you learn to examine both old and new ideas and to contribute to the good of your families, your communities, your country, and your world. I also urge you to make every effort to listen to others, converse with them, and make sure everyone is part of that conversation, for public service and civil society are inseparable. Remember that a difference of opinion does not make someone your enemy. Take inspiration from the Rule of Benedict, which states in chapter 72 that brothers in the Abbey should each try to be the first to show respect to the other, adding, no one is to pursue what he judges better for himself, but instead what he judges better for someone else. Good advice for both a monastery and our own communities, and civil society writ large. At both St. John's and St. Ben's, that advice is taken seriously. Public service has been an ideal here since the founding of both colleges. Here, the Benedictine ethos of service to one's fellow brothers has reached out to encompass public service as well. The resulting ethic of servant leadership has inspired its students to accept the noble call to government careers, which explains why one of the largest alumni chapters outside of Minnesota is in Washington, D.C. I hope to see some of you there someday. Once again, I'd like to thank President Brees for inviting me here, and Professor Lindstrom, too, for asking me to share some of my thoughts with you tonight. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here and gracing us with your presence for this, the 16th annual Eugene McCarthy Lecture, of course, hosted by the McCarthy Center for Public Policy and Civic Engagement. General, thank you so much. Let me just start by asking, what's it like to be home on your campus of your alma mater?
It's fantastic to be home. We flew in this afternoon, President, and as we were coming over central Minnesota, you see the lakes, and it opens up into St. Cloud, and as we touched down, it was just like, whew, nice to be back.
Yeah. Well, it's really good to have you back, and thank you for your remarks tonight. Can you help us understand a little bit, if we could take you back in time, back to 1982. What was in your mind, and why did you choose St. John's University?
You know, it's interesting. I've thought about this a while, but one of the things that I do remember quite clearly in that beautiful decade of the 80s
The music,
right.
the clothes.
Right, exactly. Was as I met people that had gone to St. John's, they always introduced themselves as saying, "I'm a Johnny." It was present tense.
Yeah.
I never heard someone say, "I went to St. John's, I like going to St. John's." It was always in the present, "I'm a Johnny." And that struck me. I was like, I want to be like that. I want to be a Johnny. And that's really, I think, one of the reasons that I attended here.
Yeah, that legendary Benny Johnny network is a thing.
It is.
And
It is.
it's really good to have you a part of that community. You closed your lecture talking about service. Can you talk a little bit about the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command and what you think draws the women and the men of those organizations to this work? How does service play into their work in these two enormously important organizations?
I think one of the things that draws the men and women to U.S. Cyber Command and NSA is first of all this mission, this ability to serve your country. And I think, in many ways, as you say that, you say, that sounds a little bit trite, but it's very true. And I was trying, as I was working on the speech over the past couple weeks, how do I draw what Senator McCarthy had done all the way to the present day? And I recall one of the things that draws all of us together at the agency and the command, and that's something that Senator Eugene McCarthy did as well as a senator and a representative. He swore an oath to the Constitution. Wow, it's like everything that's common amongst us at the agency and command is this idea that we're there to protect this document, that our work matters, that what we do is so unique that our national security depends upon it. I often talk about NSA as America's agency. It's America's agency because of that commitment. And I think that's one of the powerful things that draws people and continues to want people to serve at our agency and command.
Beautiful. I was struck throughout the day today and this evening with your remarks of how you demonstrate the role of conscience and courage in your work, a very complex role, this idea of serving the common good. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to integrate service, a sense of purpose, the common good, and your values, and maybe give advice to perhaps our students of how they might incorporate principled ways of leading, ethics, and values in their work? How do you do that? How do you bring that to life?
So I think one of the ways that we all learn that is through watching others that serve with you. So this idea of service with others, the idea of mentors, the idea of seeing how someone else has conducted themselves. I've had the rich privilege of serving with some of our nation's most gifted military and civilian leaders. And one of the things that I take from them is first of all, this idea of selfless service. I think I rapidly now can appreciate the selfless service of some of our elected officials and certainly some of our most senior military leaders, having seen them in action. But the second piece is this idea, I would say, of just integrity with your leadership. Leadership by integrity is something that really is the foundational piece for all good leaders. Your word is your bond, and as you're a leader, is what you say, does the audio and video match, as we say? And I think that's the second piece. And then I think the last piece that is so common is even with an agency like the National Security Agency, where we have the fastest computers in the world and the most technical things that go on, at the end of the day, it's an agency about people. And when you have all three of those things, I think that you have a pretty good equation for being able to conduct yourself as a leader of principles.
Well, of course, at St. John's, we pride ourselves on educating students for the betterment of society, and this idea of principled leadership is so important to who we are, and we really honor and respect the fact that you're a great example for our students. So thank you for being that model. And I would also like to, we don't need to turn up the house lights, but I also like to recognize our ROTC women and men and the students at St. John's. Could I have them give a little... Tonight you touched on Russia this evening, And what has surprised you most about how Russia is faring in Ukraine when it comes to cyber? And what lessons can be gleaned from this insight and this war as it relates to NSA and U.S. Cyber Command?
So we've obviously followed this very closely for quite some time. The first part of the question, what surprises me most about Russia's performance in Ukraine is the fact that they made some tremendously poor assumptions going into this conflict. The assumption that this was going to be quick and easy, the assumption that the free world wouldn't stand up to this, the assumption that Ukraine would not fight. Those were all very, very poorly formed assumptions, and they have suffered grievously for that. So I think that it reminds us that assumptions do matter as you consider these very, very significant issues. In terms of what we have learned at the agency and command, really I think we've learned three things. First of all, that presence matters. And if I might tell just a bit of a story here, at U.S. Cyber Command we have a capability called Hunt Forward Operations, where we send somewhere between 10 or 12 military members forward to a foreign country at that country's request to hunt on their networks. Now they ask us to come to look for malware and tradecraft and other malicious cyber activity that they can then strengthen their networks from an adversary. We sent a team forward on the 4th of December, and immediately the team leader called back, and she said, hey, I don't think we're going to be home for Christmas. In fact, I think we're going to be here for a while. And one of the things that was interesting is that team of 10 that soon grew to 30 was really the forward edge of our efforts in Ukraine. They were taking calls from the National Security Agency, U.S. Cyber Command, the National Security Council, private sector, allies, and they were the conduit to Ukraine. They were there in January when the Russians launched a series of destructive attacks. They were there in February when the Russians took down the satellite communications in the country. This team's forward presence hardened the networks and was essential, I think, for Ukraine's later success in being able to maintain their communications. So the first piece is presence. We learned that. Presence matters. The second piece that we have truly learned is the partnership between the public and private sector. So in cyberspace, one of the unique things of this domain is the fact that the private sector controls almost all of the resources within this domain. In the United States, 90% of our critical infrastructure are controlled by the private sector. But the private sector with Ukraine, it was interesting, as a number of different companies came to the aid of Ukraine, we were able to rapidly share information with those companies, and as those companies took that information, hundreds of millions of endpoints, an endpoint is like a phone, a server, a computer, suddenly had the information of malware that might be used against them. It's almost like inoculating 400 million endpoints or users at one time to any type of destructive or disruptive behavior in cyberspace. And the third thing I think we learned is really this idea of public information. The president made some very, very key decisions to share information with the world, downgrading, declassifying some of the intelligence community's most sensitive information. And we did it for three reasons. We did it to build a coalition, to disrupt an adversary, and to aid a partner. And in all three of those areas, we've had tremendous success.
Wow. Well, I want to, this next, yep. This next question, I have a particular personal and professional interest in your response, a specific interest. You talked tonight about your unique position of holding authority and responsibility of two top government departments. Some call it a dual hat structure. I am particularly interested in what you could share with us about what that kind of responsibility over two organizations, what that looks like, what that means, how does that make your job easier or harder, and how do you think about it with regard to strong integration?
You know, President, of all the questions you were going to ask me tonight, I thought for sure that would be a Washington, D.C. question, but I'm pleased to answer that question. The dual hat, as the President indicates, I lead the National Security Agency, the largest element of the U.S. intelligence community, and also lead U.S. Cyber Command, which is one of the 11 combatant commands that fall under the President and the Secretary of Defense. One of the ways that I talk about leading these two organizations is the fact that what we are trying to do in the domain of cyberspace is really three things. We have to operate with speed, faster than our adversaries. We have to operate agilely. So when something changes, we have to agilely react. And third, we've got to be able to work with unity of effort. So 1 + 1 = 5. And that's the piece that I think the dual hat brings me in terms of this domain of cyberspace. When we have so many challenges, having one leader that determines the priorities, the resources, the focus, the vector allows us to do those three things. And I suspect it allows you to do the same.
Yeah. We actually have a lot of things in common in terms of what we're talking about there at a much smaller scale. We have 600 employees. He has 60,000 employees. This next question is, I'd like to begin by just acknowledging that you're in uniform, and that for all the women and men here in uniform, we thank you for your service. And let's recognize her. And the women and men in uniform see a lot in their experience. And could you maybe just give us a little bit of your own perspective, the best day in uniform and the hardest day in uniform?
The best day in uniform. The 25th of May, 1986, I was commissioned.
Wow.
So this year, I think, marks 37 years since I swore an oath.
Yeah.
It was, 4 years. I thought it was a lifetime then to get to commissioning. But it's the one thing that I think most about in terms of my professional career, because, at that time in my life, as I was starting my career, which I thought was going to be 4 years and back to Minnesota to make my fortune, it began a kind of a pathway to other things that I would do. The most challenging day, and this came up today with discussion with the students, 11th of September 2001. I was at the Pentagon. It was like, wow, it's just like the whole world had changed.
Yeah.
And I think of my service, everything, since the 11th of September, and I really don't remember a lot before the 11th of September because, the world had changed so much on that day, and then, of course, our nation, our military, all those things changed pretty significantly.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the 37 years of service. Let's recognize the general. With the gift of 2020 vision and the pride that we take at St. Ben's and St. John's of having a really unique and powerful Benedictine liberal arts educational experience, reflect back again some years ago.
What great decade of the 80s.
Yeah, the great decade of the 80s. What part of your college experience was most impactful? And maybe what classes would you like to retake given what you know now in your lived experience?
Wow. So I think I would say, what would I like to do? I'd like to do it all over again. I'd like to do freshman orientation all the way to graduation and do it again because I think now I know exactly what I missed out on. With age comes wisdom, hopefully, and at least experience. I think that the things that really have meant the most to me as I think back on my education are certainly the relationships with the classes and the learning that I did here, but fundamentally it's the friendships that were formed here. A number of my classmates here from the class of '86, friends from St. Ben's that I went to school with, my closest friends and associates still remain from my time here at St. John's. So if that's what I received in 4 years, I think I had a tremendous experience at this university. Here's the other thing, and I was kind of chuckling about this today, and I'm going to tell my mother this next time I talk to her. When we came from freshman orientation, the parents came here to the auditorium. It wasn't called the Stephen Humphrey Auditorium in those days, and it didn't look anything like this. But she came out of that, and I remember her telling me a couple things. First of all, she told me that this is your school. You're going to love this school. It's a great school. We just heard from Father Roman Power, and he told us all about the activities of what you can and can't do. Do you know that you can get a quarter keg into your room, but you have to get all these signatures and training first from Health Life Services? I mean, this is my mother telling me this at freshman orientation. And I'm thinking to myself, a quarter keg, my mother telling me that. I was just like, I mean...
How bad does she want you to stay at college?
I was like... And then the second thing is that, as only a mother can do, she's introducing me to all the people at St. John's as we're going through. We go into the reef, and she introduces me to the food facility manager. His name was Dave Schoenberger. I don't know if he's still here, but I remember meeting him, and I remember him looking at me like, "Why am I meeting you?" But that's kind of an interesting memory that I have. But I think it was the indication early on that my mother was right. There was something very special about this place that was going to stay with me, and so. Perhaps for those professors that are in the audience, Joe Friedrich and Ken Jones, maybe I could do my papers one more time to polish them up a bit. But other than that, I'm really pleased with what I did here.
I would suspect if you resubmitted them for a revision, you'd get an A. Is what
I don't know.
Say. Well, I don't want to be the person that slows down the general on his next leg of his trip, but I would like to thank you for being the wonderful leader that you are, for leading with integrity and representing St. Ben's and St. John's with such a fine fashion. We're indebted to you for coming back and sharing some of your insight and participating in this lecture series. And so thank you so much for joining
Thanks,
us.
President.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And I'd also like to thank all of you for attending this wonderful lecture series, and we invite you to please travel home safely, and God bless you all. Thank you.